Thank you all for being here today to really not only remember Thulani, but to celebrate his life and his legacy. We will start with, I think there's an echo here.
There is a little bit of it.
We'll start with a little 25 minutes memorial to Thulani, followed by a panel discussion about the future of Swaziland. I want to first give the podium to our Senior Associate Dean, Heather Hughes, to say a few words of welcome.
Thank you, Patty Day, and thank you all so much for being here. You know, human rights and the rule of law are powerful concepts, but they're abstract. They become real in the people who study and practice them. The loss of a dedicated and skilled champion of these concepts is a collective tragedy. So I'm grateful that we were able to gather here today to honor Thulani.
Thank you, Heather. I want to thank today all those who have sponsored and allowed this event to take place. The Center for Human Rights at WCL, Professor David Hunter, the AVA Center for Human Rights, Vanguard Africa, of course, Fernanda Ellenberg, Sarah Kettle, Hadar Harris, and all the catering and the AV people that you see here. It took a village. I want to thank and acknowledge the presence of Ambassador Makila James. Thank you for being here. Who's going to be on the panel, Velaphi Mamba, who has traveled, I think, from Boston to join us today. Jeffrey Smith, who you will see later. Our professors who are here, Bob Goldman, who's going to speak later. I want to particularly thank IIE, the Human Rights Humphrey Program. Thulani was a Humphrey Fellow. The year that he was here was the year that I was not running the Humphrey Program. So I didn't have the privilege of actually knowing Thulani. But I would like to acknowledge President of IIE, Dr. Alan Goodman, who's here with us, and Peter Moran, and from the State Department, the partners that make this program possible. I have Nenena Ofoveke Lewis. I don't know, there you are. Thank you so much for being here. For me, I have been here for 25 years, and the Humphrey Program has been something that energizes me. And really, if I look at a positive experience in my life, it's been getting to know the Humphrey Fellows. Some of our current Humphrey Fellows are here. And it breaks my heart because I'm so impressed with how they put their life on the line and what they do for us here when they impact us, but for their own countries when they go back home. I always say this is one of the most wonderful programs that the State Department has, and I will advocate and talk about it to anybody that they ever want me to, because of the impact that it's had on the world, the network of Humphreys that we have had. So I would like to now invite Peter Moran, who actually runs the Humphrey Program within the IIE, to say a few words. Peter.
Thank you, Malika. Thanks, everyone, for allowing me to speak just for a moment. My name is Peter Moran, as Patty mentioned. I'm the director of the Hubert H. Humphrey Program for the Institute of International Education. And like Patty, sadly, I did not have the pleasure of knowing Mr. Thulani Maseko. He was a fellow on the Humphrey Program right here at American University, Washington College of Law, as you know, in 2010 to 2011. Some of you may not know what the Humphrey Fellowship Program is, so just a quick word about that. The fellowship brings together mid-career professionals with leadership potential from a wide range of fields, including law and human rights, which is the specialty here at American University, Washington College of Law. Fellows potentially from up to 130 countries every year, usually around 90 every year. It's a very competitive program. It's a program that really brings to us, to the United States, some of the most outstanding people in many different fields from around the world. The program was inaugurated by President Jimmy Carter in 1979 in memory of the senator, the vice president, and a tireless statesman for the greater good, Hubert H. Humphrey. During a eulogy at Humphrey's funeral, President Carter remarked, "From time to time, our nation is blessed by the presence of men and women who bear the mark of greatness, who help us see a better vision of what we can become. Hubert Humphrey was such a man." And so indeed, without exaggeration, was Thulani Maseko. For his honesty and his bravery in the face of absolute power, for simply saying that there is no freedom of speech in his homeland, Swaziland, eSwatini, he went to jail for the first time in 2009. It wasn't the last time. Mr. Maseko did not back down because he worked and he spoke from a deep moral center. He spoke against abuses of power, the ways in which the poor of his country slip further into suffering as the few wealthy elite grow richer and richer. And Thulani spoke up for participatory democracy, not overnight or through revolution, but through real dialogue with the Swazi monarchy and the powers that be, and always through peaceful means. So our prayers today and for coming days are with the people of eSwatini and Swaziland, and with Thulani's wife, Tenele, their children, and Mr. Maseko's siblings and his wider family. All of us at the Institute of International Education are sponsors of the Humphrey Fellowship Program at the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the Department of State, and those of us who are inspired by Humphrey Fellows, the fellows we meet every year. We all feel this loss. We will remember Thulani Maseko's courage, his example of moral strength, and his aspirations for a more just and a more democratic world. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Peter. I'm now going to ask Melania Radnovich, who was in charge of the cohort the year Thulani was here, to say a few words and about a remembrance of him, and also maybe comments from his cohorts.
Good afternoon, everyone. It was such a great honor always to meet amazing Humphrey Fellows. And I first met Thulani when he arrived to DC and WCL to participate in Humphrey Fellowship Program 2010-11, together with another amazing fellows and beautiful minds who came from Ghana, Nigeria, Togo, Sri Lanka, Laos, China, Argentina, Chile, Brazil, and Bulgaria. So I was fortunate then to be the one who spent entire year with them and helping them to achieve their professional goals. Thulani was absolutely dedicated, and he dedicated every second of his time and life here in DC to meet more people, to broaden his network, to collaborate with his counterparts, and to empower himself to be a better leader for his nation. He was a person with a big heart and brave heart, but also heartwarming smile. And I don't know if we will be showing later some pictures from the time he spent actually with Humphrey Fellowship Program. He always had that amazing smile and very deep, deep eyes, and the way he would look at you when you talk about. Sorry, it's really hard to speak about Thulani because I vividly remember moments when we had a conversation about his concern about being imprisoned once he returned home post Humphrey Fellowship program. I spoke with him about how it will be way better if he can actually go to South Africa for a while and be safe and sound, and maybe he can influence his country even better if he's there for a while. He said his idol was Nelson Mandela, and he said that I know, but I need to be at home and fight for the future of the new generations. That fight cannot wait and be done from a distance. He was willing to go to any length of sacrifice for his nation and for his people. And so he non-violently fought and obviously gave his heart, his mind, and his life for his country. I still vividly remember also his country presentations where he so proudly spoke about Swaziland and his people, how he was so passionate about and showed so much passion and so much love for his dream of making that country way better. He will forever be in our hearts, and he will forever be inspiration for all of us. Fellows who spent time with Thulani and me in 2010-11 shared long messages and emails once they heard about what happened to Thulani. I'll read just a few sentences. Devastating news. Thulani Maseko, a fearless man. He defined everything and his life for the freedom of his people. He remains forever in our hearts. He was unraveling in his pursuit of a better society for his people. He fought till the very end for that. I'm devastated to hear. Thulani, brave leader, committed to his cause. He went through so much, but never gave up. But his voice would not be silenced by gunshots. May he rest in peace.
Thank you, Melania. I would like to now invite Hadar Harris, who was actually his faculty host during the Humphrey program here when she was the director of the Center for Human Rights. Hadar also became very close to Thulani over the years following his fellowship here. And you will set it for two. It's going to be followed by two videos.
Okay. You just tell me what I need to do.
Just,
I want to thank WCL and Professor Patide Alai, Fernanda Ellenberg, and the International Legal Studies Program for organizing today's event. I also want to really acknowledge Gina Anderson and the ABA Center for Human Rights and Jeff Smith, who have been our partners around advocacy to support Thulani in all of his work when he was here and when he went back home to Swaziland. Let me be clear, I'm calling it Swaziland because although the king unilaterally renamed the country eSwatini, Thulani at the time of his death had a lawsuit against the king for unconstitutionally unilaterally renaming the country, and that was Thulani. So much has been written and said about Thulani since his shocking murder 2 weeks ago. And let's also call that what it was. He was assassinated in his living room with his family present, just hours after the king had made comments threatening pro-democracy activists within the country. Let's call it what it was. It was an assassination. His impact on the region and his network of human rights defenders around the world was vast in life and is even greater after his assassination. The outpouring has been amazing and not amazing, expected, but truly tragic. But what many sometimes have lost is Thulani, the man, the student, the friend, the husband, and the father. For few human rights defenders like Thulani, those roles often merge together, and for him, it most certainly did. I met Thulani, as Patide mentioned, when I was so fortunate to be named his faculty host while he was studying at the as a Humphrey Fellow here at WCL. At the time, I was in one of my best jobs as the director of the Center for Human Rights and Humanitarian Law here at WCL. We met often to talk about his studies and how it was going, and most specifically about how what he was learning and the people he was meeting and the network he was creating were going to help him create a multi-party democracy in Swaziland. I knew nothing about Swaziland before I was his faculty host. I apologize to those of you from Swaziland and those of you on Zoom who are joining us. But boy, did I learn so much from him and so much in the ensuing years. As he reflected on his courses, I remember a long lunch at Terra Thai. For those of you who were in the old building, that was the Thai restaurant across the street. As he laid out his plans about how he was going to bring a multi-party democracy to Swaziland, I thought at the time and ever since that he was kind of positioning himself, like he was very beautiful, the vision that he had. But you know, I don't know what's really going to happen. But he talked about Nelson Mandela, where's Melania? And he really understood himself to be the Nelson Mandela of Swaziland. He was supposed to be the first democratic president of Swaziland. I truly believe that. And because of that, I truly believe that's why he was murdered. He returned to Swaziland and we kept in touch. And when he and Becky Makubu were imprisoned for publishing a newspaper article critical of the judiciary, we launched into action, not just the Center for Human Rights and not just WCL, but partners from the ABA, from Vanguard Africa, which wasn't quite Vanguard Africa then, RFK Human Rights, and a number of human rights organizations, major organizations who did not want to be publicly in front, allowing everybody else to be publicly in front. But it wasn't just us, it was his friends and his network who he created all around the world because he knew the risks that he was taking and he knew what could and probably would happen to him. So we launched a campaign to free him, the Swazi Justice Campaign. You're going to see a video that we created in a few minutes. But our efforts were just part of a large global effort to free him. Throughout Africa, Europe, many campaigns began. I was fortunate enough to go to Swaziland with Jeff Smith, meeting Ambassador James and activists from throughout the region with the support of the ABA Center for Human Rights to observe his appeal at the Supreme Court. Jeff Smith, who you're going to meet in a few minutes, was a real dangerous actor there. They blocked the internet when we showed up at the Supreme Court building so that he could not, in his very eloquent Twitter way, report on what was actually happening at the courthouse. I delivered brightly colored letters of support that WCL students and the AU community had written for Thulani. I gave them to Tanele, his wife. We spent several really intensive days together and showed him the video that you will see later. It meant a great deal to him and to them at the time. And even in the midst of his imprisonment, including extended solitary confinement and a corrupt legal proceeding, Thulani's smile, like Melania mentioned, was broad and deep, and he was still able to laugh because he exuded joy knowing that what he was doing, even in difficult moments, was creating a better future for his country. Thulani and Becky were eventually released, but not for many more months. And his work over these past few years, working towards a negotiated transition to democracy, leading the multi-stakeholder forum, was a reflection of his life's work and his commitment to peaceful transition, bringing stakeholders together and moving to democracy. Thulani's brutal murder, his assassination, is a horrible loss for Swaziland and a devastating loss for Tanele and their two sons, his beautiful sons and his family. I'm gratified to see so many people here from the State Department, from human rights organizations, the people who are online, because we have a job to do to honor his legacy. His legacy must be upheld, and not just in name, but really in deed. There has to be an independent, impartial investigation into his murder and full accountability, which we will be talking about in a few minutes. But the talks which have been delayed regarding a movement to democracy need to take place as fast as possible, faster than what the government says is possible, immediately. So the struggle to move to a democratic Swaziland is our struggle in Thulani's name. It's something that we all must be participating in and helping with. I'm going to close just by saying how grateful I am to WCL and to this community for convening this event. And I hope that as we hear from additional speakers, as we hear from our panel today, that we can think about actions to take, to move forward, to support the brave activists who are still in Swaziland working for a better future, and those who are in exile, many who have been forced to go into exile in South Africa and other places, in Boston, in the meantime. So with that,
You want to frame, I think we have a statement from Arnold Sunga,
we
right?
have two statements on video that were sent. One from Mary Lawler, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders. And the second from Arnold Sunga, who was a Humphrey Fellow in Minnesota, a fellow Humphrey Fellow, who headed the Africa Division of the International Commission of Jurists, which is when I met him. He was with us in Swaziland at the trial, and who knew Thulani very well. They worked together much of the time. So right now we have the statement from Mary Lawler.
As we all know, on the night of the 21st of January 2023, Mr. Thulani Maseko was assassinated at his home in the Manzini region of eSwatini. He had dedicated much of his life to the defense of human rights and the fight against oppression. He was shot dead in the presence of his wife and his children, with the assailant reportedly firing through the window of their home. The perpetrators have yet to be identified. The assassination of Thulani came hours after a public pronouncement by the king, in which he reportedly issued a warning to those speaking out and spreading disharmony in the country, including pro-democracy campaigners. Thulani was an advocate for justice and human rights. His killing is a great loss and a massive blow to the human rights movement, not only in eSwatini, but beyond. The authorities have stated that they are investigating their killing, but given their record, there are doubts as to their will that it will be fair, independent, impartial, and transparent. Thulani's murder shocked and saddened me. I had the great privilege of going to Zimbabwe to monitor the last election with Thulani, Arnold Sunga, and Simpwe Sid. It was an unforgettable period. My abiding memory of Thulani was his deep concentration whenever he was listening to somebody or talking to somebody, and his ever smiling face when we were traveling from one place to another or when we were eating. He was a joy to be with. I spoke to him about his own imprisonment as a human rights defender and the challenges he was facing. He carried his wounds lightly. I think Thulani was made of fire and air. Fire because he burned with a passion to right wrongs, and air because, as in the words of our beloved poet Seamus Heaney, he walked on air against his better judgment. Thulani didn't give up because his heart hungered for justice, and he was rooted in his values and his place. Let me close by offering my deep sympathy to Thulani's wife, his children, his wider family, his friends, his community of human rights defenders, and everyone Though he has been slain, he will continue to be a light pointing the way for me. Rest in peace, Thulani.
Now we're going to hear from Arnold.
My name is Arnold Tsunga. I'm the resident director for the National Democratic Institute in Zimbabwe. I've had the privilege of working with Thulani for just about 10 years at the International Commission of Jurists. I'm extremely excited that colleagues in the United States of America have chosen to commemorate Thulani's life and celebrate his life essentially. Thulani and I have a number of things in common. Besides working for the International Commission of Jurists together to strengthen the rule of law, access to justice, and the independence of the judiciary in Africa, we were also both Hubert Humphrey Fellows, which is a program that is funded by the United States government through the Fulbright Fellowship. That relationship resulted in us being able to work together at the ICJ. And in that work, one thing that became so obvious to me was Thulani's belief and adherence, as it were, in the way in which he ran his life to the rule of law and to respect for human rights, to building of democracy. He quickly made me very much aware of the fact that the people of Swaziland were being treated as subjects rather than as citizens of their society. And he did not like at all the system of government that subordinated people to be subjects. So the funny thing is that he also believed very firmly that the system of government could be resolved through dialogue. So at every point in our discussions, he always said that no to violence, but yes to dialogue. And I think he has been let down by the international community. He has been let down by the African Union, by the SADC, in that as he called for peaceful dialogue, the people who took out his life used violence in front of his children, in front of his wife, to extinguish a voice of reason in his own country. So I think he has left us with a legacy. He has left us with a very clear message that we need to contribute to the resolving of the crisis of governance in eSwatini and be able to put pressure on the African Union, on the Africa's leaders, on the SADC, to ensure that there can be a peaceful approach to resolving the conflict of governance in eSwatini. But beyond all, I think the fact that those who murdered him in cold blood in a very cowardly way did so in front of his wife, in front of his children, in his own house, in a place that is meant to be the safest of places for anyone. It means that you cannot trust the authorities who are suspected to be behind the planning, the sponsoring, and the operational work that was done to execute Thulani extrajudicially for an independent and impartial investigation. That work, we have a precedence already in Lesotho, where we had a rogue military person who executed a number of individuals, and the SADC set a SADC commission of inquiry that was led by a judge of Botswana, Justice Mohapi, and Justice Pumapi. The Justice Pumapi Commission of Inquiry came out with recommendations that have substantially contributed to Lesotho getting back on a path of a democratic consolidation. That is what we need in Swaziland. So that at least if the Commission of Inquiry is set up by SADC, the recommendations coming out of that inquiry could result in the truth coming out in terms of who was behind the killing of Thulani, in terms of the roadmap towards the people of Swaziland, including the king, reflecting on the system of government that is beneficial to everyone, that makes it possible for the people of Swaziland to have a voice in their own governance. Just maybe the concluding point on my relationship with Thulani from a professional experience. You know, he was such a demander for access to justice that in one case, which makes it possible for me to refer to the cooperation that I had with Jeffrey Smith, with Hada Harris, in terms of Thulani standing up against the Chief Justice and demanding for justice for an ordinary person in the Ministry of Transport who had impounded a vehicle belonging to a judge. And when the Chief Justice then, Ramadibede, may his soul rest in peace, demanded that Banjana Gwebu, that is the official from the Ministry of Justice, releases the vehicle from impounding that he had done, Gwebu said no, but I report to the ministry officials within the Ministry of Transport, not to you as the Chief Justice. And because of that, the Chief Justice ordered that this inspector be sent to jail. And Thulani wrote a series of opinions in the Nations magazine, criticizing that the Chief Justice is not above the law and must be subject to the law as well. That is what the rule of law means. And the result of that is that the Chief Justice then set up what I can call a kangaroo court that resulted in Thulani being imprisoned for a period of 2 years. And within that period, when he was going through the trial, I came across Jeffrey Smith, across Hada Harris. They flew all the way from America to Mbabane to witness the trial, to support human rights defenders in eSwatini, and to be on the shoulders, shoulder to shoulder, in giving solidarity and strength to human rights defenders. That is what American citizens should do in terms of giving support to the human rights defenders in Swaziland, to ensure that the vision for which Thulani had for his country does not get buried with him, but in fact that his burial is the planting of a seed that then results in the legacy of Thulani feeding into the struggle for greater democratization of Swaziland. So on those bases, I say the struggle continues. Amanda.
Thank you very much. I think for the brevity, I should just say that Arnold worked with the international ICJ, International Commission of Jurists. Bob Goldman is the current president of the ICJ, and they put out a very strong statement on Thulani that you can all access. I want to turn over to Jeffrey Smith, the panel, and have a discussion. So I'm going to move away and introduce Jeff. Is the founding director of Vanguard Africa, a nonprofit organization that works with pro-democracy leaders across Africa to build campaigns for free and fair elections. He's also the co-creator and producer of the Resistance Bureau, an online program that spotlights the global struggle for human freedom, where a new generation of leaders share stories of resistance, resilience, and building solidarity. So Jeff, you have got the floor.
Thank you.
And we're going to show the video that you guys made.
Excellent. Thank you so much, colleagues, for being here in person, and also the many who are watching online, and for the solidarity that you heard Arnold speaking about, which is so important in this line of work. And we're unfortunately reminded of that when events like this happen. I know we're a bit short on time, so I apologies for getting right into it. I'm really honored and pleased to be joined by some amazing colleagues today. Velaphi Mamba, who is a very prominent Swazi human rights activist with former affiliations at the Open Society Institute of Southern Africa. He's currently a student at Harvard University, so we're so happy to have you here today. So thank you. Professor Robert Goldman, of who I'm sure many of you in the audience know, the current president of the International Commission of Jurists, which we've heard a bit about, and I'll certainly be asking him about their strong statement and what more can be done to hold the perpetrators of Thulani Maseko's murder accountable. And of course, Ambassador Michaela James, a very good friend and very staunch supporter of Thulani and the human rights movement in Swaziland. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. She's currently a senior advisor at the Africa Center at the U.S. Institute of Peace and former affiliations at the Africa Center for Security Studies. We couldn't be joined by a better panel, and I'm really honored to be here with you and talking about our friend and colleague. And before we start, I'm going to go to Velaphi first, but I have to comment on, the number of people that we've already heard from talking about Thulani, the man, and his smile. And I will never forget, Hadar was talking about how we were there in court with him. And there was a break in the court hearing one of those days, and we just happened to catch eye contact. He was standing across the room from us, and of course he's standing there in shackles and leg irons that they prayed him in. And we made eye contact, and he motioned for me to come over, and I was really nervous. We're in an official court proceeding, and what do I do? So I walked over, and he like reached over the barrier that was there and said, I want you to stand with me because I want to remember how to smile. And it's just an indelible memory that I'll never forget. And that it was just always there. Like, he was undergoing immense persecution. He was in prison on entirely trumped up bogus charges. And he wanted to remember how to smile, and just being surrounded by friends. And it goes back to the notion and importance of solidarity. And I think, while we're going to remember and celebrate his life, and it's a somber occasion, to be sure, I want this to be hopeful as well. So hopefully we can end on a positive note. And in the lead up to this, I was going through the many emails and messages we had sent back and forth. And one particular passage stood out. And he, as often as he quoted Nelson Mandela, he could also, recite pages from the Bible as well. And he wrote to me one time recently, and he wrote, "The biblical Joseph is recorded in scripture as having said, 'You plotted evil against me, but God turned it into good.'" So I hope we can remember that when we're remembering him today, and the good that he did, and the much good work that remains to be done. So with that said, Velaphi, I want to come to you first, because many people perhaps in the audience, they may not know the kingdom of Swaziland. What is the situation there? Perhaps give us an update, but also, contextualize the struggle that Thulani had for multi-party democracy in the country. How did his fight for that, how did his struggle for that fit into the broader context of human rights in Swaziland, and what is the current situation today?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Jeffrey. And I would like to recognize all of you for coming here, and those who have facilitated for us to be able to have this remembrance memorial. And also to honor my panelists here. I'm particularly pleased to be with Ambassador James. And I want to start off responding to you with sharing two distinct stories, which I think, in a sense, will be emblematic of who Thulani Maseko was. Can you hear me?
Yes.
closer to the mic. Okay, thank you. The first story relates to Thulani's persecution in 2014, when he was being persecuted for writing about the capture of the judiciary in Swaziland and the absence of the rule of law. At the time, I was meant to travel to the United States under the President Obama's Young African Leaders Initiative. We conspired together with Ambassador Makila James here to, Thulani was already in jail at the time. So I felt that it would be important for him to kind of write a letter to President Barack Obama about his incarceration, and at least have someone that he could, express how he felt about what he was going through. So we hatched this plan with the ambassador here, together with a lawyer that Thulani worked with. His name is Busiso Nhlabazi, as well as his wife, Comrade Daniel, to say, let's ask Thulani to actually write this letter from prison. And so Thulani wasn't, he liked writing a lot. So he said, okay, I'm up for it. I'm going to write this letter. So he wrote the letter, and it was a very long, touching letter, which we smuggled out of prison. And I carried it across the Atlantic. And the ambassador here prepared some people to take it directly to President Obama, to which he actually wrote him a response, and actually added his voice in terms of the international pressure that was applied to get Thulani released together with Bheki Makubu from prison. So I wanted to start with that because I've never told this story publicly. And I'm happy to tell it now because Ambassador is no longer ambassador in Swaziland. But it was just a gesture that showed, like people Hada has said, Thulani was this always smiling character, always hopeful, always tenacious and firm in the values that he stood for. And even in that letter that he wrote, I think I regret that I didn't take a digital copy of it at the time. I'll probably seek out President Obama for a copy.
We can work on that.
Yeah. It was such a powerful letter, but he was speaking about the struggles of the people of Swaziland. And like Hada here, I call it Swaziland myself because that's what it is. And we were never against the name itself. The name eSwatini is an indigenous name for the country that has always been there. But the point was about the unconstitutional nature, just the symbol of power that one man can wake up and decide that today I'm changing the name of the entire country, all by himself, with no due consultation or anything or recognition of the people who live in that territory. And this is quite, quite strange for us as Swazis, because we've always believed that we are not subjects, we are citizens, and Thulani has represented our aspirations as people who want to live as citizens rather than subjects. I want to move on to the second story, which is a bit more painful and solemn about Thulani. I know that many of you already know how Thulani Maseko was killed, which is why you are here. But I want to situate Thulani Maseko's killing in the context of the unknown Swazis that have died before him. Thulani, you got to know about him because of his global stature as an icon and a human rights defender in Swaziland. But Thulani dies in the footsteps of hundreds of other Swazis that have been killed by the state in Swaziland. And I want to emphasize this point. Even before the June 2021 massacre, the Swazi state has been a violent state, in particular on those people that stand for the values of freedom and democracy and good governance and an open liberal state. And those people have suffered and have been killed in the jails of Swaziland, in the streets of Swaziland, by the military establishment and the securocracy in the country. The Swazi army has never fought a single war in the world. It has never participated in any war. There is a war right now going on in Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado, northern Mozambique. The Swazi army has never been deployed to go and assist in that war and in that conflict. The Swazi army was established specifically to shut down the voices of Swazis who believe in a democratic state. And this was in 1973, when the independence constitution of the country was unilaterally abrogated by the father of the current king. And I want to mention this so that you understand that Thulani dies after decades and decades of oppression and suppression of the people of Swaziland. This is the context that ultimately led to his assassination. In June 2021, the people of Swaziland escalated their demands for a free state, for the right to elect a government of their own choosing, for the right for political parties to exist and form a government of the country. Because in Swaziland, political parties remain banned. Freedoms are limited and curtailed. Parliament is under the control of the king. The executive is actually appointed by the king. So all the unfettered powers that he has have resulted in a state where we practically have a dictatorship in the country. And Thulani, like myself, was one of the people who believed that this situation in the country was untenable and also unsustainable. And we've seen this in the breakdown of the social contract in terms of the provision of education, health services, food security, and all the other social imperatives that a normal functioning state should actually provide to its citizens. So I wanted to lay that framework so that all of us can understand why Thulani was killed. Thulani was killed after more than 100 citizens in Swaziland were brutally murdered between the 2 days of June 29 and June 30, 2021. I was with Thulani in Swaziland burying all those people. We moved from homestead to homestead, weekend to weekend, looking at dead bodies and people in their caskets who had been killed by the military, by the army. It is on record that the government of Swaziland, in particular, the deputy prime minister, who was the acting prime minister at the time, Themba Masuku, as well as the king's firstborn daughters, Khanyiso Dlamini, are on record saying that there were mercenaries in Swaziland who were killing these people. But these mercenaries were driving government vehicles. These mercenaries were in government uniform. These mercenaries were carrying government guns. And during the time when these people were cut down so brutally, the government deployed police and soldiers into hospitals to extract the bullets from their bodies, so that when they were buried, those bullets had been removed and the evidence had been erased. This is the same thing that has happened with Thulani himself. After he was killed, the government came in there with no response in terms of chasing after his murderers. Right now in Swaziland, whenever there is a shooting, there is a helicopter that comes out, there are sniffer dogs, there are police who go on trail trying to track down the shooters. All that was never done in Thulani's killing. That helicopter remained silent. Instead, a contingent of police officers came to his home to extract bullets from his body. This is the same government that people are saying must actually investigate itself. Investigate itself how, when all the evidence has already been erased? This is the problem that we are faced with. So all those people that I'm talking about, which we estimated to be over 100, because at the time, some people were buried without us knowing. Families were visited and threatened not to say that people have been killed, and all those kind of erasure patterns that were done at the time. And this is how, and this is what has led to the assassination of Comrade Thulani Maseko. And ever since that time, Swaziland has known no peace. The state has continued to deploy the military in the streets. The military is not in the barracks, even as I sit here and speak to you. There are roadblocks all over the country. The state is violently invading people's homes, hunting down comrades and calling them terrorists. We know that they are not terrorists in Swaziland. They are freedom fighters. We know that there are democracy activists in Swaziland who are rightfully pursuing a noble cause, which is a cause of freedom like any other country in the world, in line with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and all other global human rights instruments. This is what Swazis are fighting for, and this is what Thulani Maseko was killed for. But it's not just him. Since that massacre, a number of Swazis have been extrajudicially killed in the country, shot by the police and the army. I'm going to mention a few of them. Musagnene was brutally killed for so-called an offense of violating COVID restrictions, just because he happened to be found in the middle of the night driving back home from the city. He was killed with no questions asked. No inquiry done to this day. It was like they were killing a dog. 2 young men in Lomahasha were gunned down by a police officer, who even today, that police officer has not been charged. He's not been arrested. This is Scoop Bunyoni and Impostoli Masilele. They are dead. I was there, I buried them. I saw them going down into their graves. I saw them in their caskets. So for us, this is a lived pain and experience, what we are talking about. It's not a story. This is how Thulani Maseko died. There are a number of other people that have been killed in the country in this way, which the state has not conducted any inquiry about or any investigation. Like I've said, it's like they are killing dogs. And the world has remained quiet. So I'm here today to speak on behalf of those 1.2 million people and to ask you to remember them and to stand with them and to make sure that going forward, not a single drop of Swazi people is dropped back home in Swaziland. This is what I'm here to request. And this is what the situation, Jeffrey, is right now. We are very clear that we are calling for a peaceful, inclusive national dialogue. This is what Thulani and ourselves have said from day one, that we want an externally mediated dialogue, not what SADC wants us to do. The SADC now has thrown the decision to have or not have a dialogue into the king's courtyard. The king doesn't want a dialogue because he doesn't want, he's holding on to power. We want the international community, we want the United Nations, we want everyone that matters to help us to have a proper, inclusive, genuine national political dialogue held on terms that will allow us to be able to ventilate all the public issues that need to be ventilated and to place the country on a sure pedestal towards change and freedom, to have a new constitution that will recognize the rights that we have as Swazis. We don't want to be subjects anymore. The time for us and our freedom has come. And if the world does not listen, there will be no peace in Swaziland. The generations that are arising now are generations that will no longer be oppressed by King Mswati III. He can take whatever he wants from us in terms of material possessions, but he can never take the spirit that Thulani stood for, which is a spirit that we also stand for. And indeed, I want to say that, like Thulani himself, we will be on the path to justice when Freedom Day comes. So we are going to fight. We are going to stand for these rights. And we are going to work with all of you. We will bother you for as much as is necessary for us to get Swaziland to be a democratic state, like all other countries. We cannot have a dictatorship amongst a sea of democracies in Southern Africa. The time for that is over. This is the message that we want to relay today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Velaphi. And of course, he's not going to say this here, but quite literally, he's putting his own life on the line here today, talking about these issues as stridently and as forcefully and as vocally and publicly as he is. So thank you for your submission and for your continued bravery, Velaphi. And I think that's actually a good segue to Ambassador James, because as we heard Arnold talking about in his video, that he feels as if Thulani and the impact he made, he's being let down. And we've heard from Velaphi about the long-standing climate of repression in Africa's last absolute monarchy. You know the situation better than anyone. You are ambassador there. You know these issues very well. And I'll be straightforward, but very complex question, I'm sure. But what can the U.S. government do based on your experience as ambassador there, as a deputy assistant secretary here in Washington? What can the U.S. feasibly do? What can they realistically do? And how did you, as ambassador, respond to prior crackdowns that we heard Velaphi speak so eloquently about?
Thank you. Yes. Yes.
Maybe just take this off.
First of all, good afternoon. Let me first of all thank the Washington College of Law for hosting us and inviting us here, for Jeff for convening this panel, for reaching out to me personally, and to all of you for being here. You are truly the most important people in the room. You are the reason that we are here to convey a message to you, to get you all to think, to open your eyes and your ears and your hearts to what is the human rights challenge in a small country like Swaziland and Eswatini. I'm going to go back and forth. I lived through Swaziland and now it's Eswatini, so I may go back and forth. It's not a statement of politics on my part. It's just the reality that I lived through. Let me just start by saying I want to share and pass my particular strong condolences to Tinelli and to her family. I got to know Thulani almost as much through Tinelli as I did through him directly, because I was in Swaziland in 2012 to 2015, and he was arrested in 2014. So I didn't have as much interaction with him directly, but once he was arrested, Tinelli and I had several strong, long conversations about his struggle and what it meant for him to be there, and what it meant for the international community to be a part of that struggle and to bear witness and to speak up about it. So I want to share my condolences with the family and to all Swazis who understand what is at stake. In the interest of time, I'm going to simply associate myself with everything that Velaphi has said. The situation is that dire, it is that dangerous, it is that concerning and that alarming. And it's alarming not only for Eswatini and the human rights advocates and democracy advocates there, but it is a concern for the region, for Africa, and internationally, for all of us who want to support democracy and the right to have basic fundamental rights respected. We must pay attention to what is happening in Swaziland. It is that canary in the coal mine that's telling us in a small, what used to be perceived as a peaceful country, is a man like Thulani, a man of peace, a man of principles, and a man of perseverance could be gunned down in his home. There is no safety for anyone. And that is the message that was being sent by his killers. And I agree with what Hadar said. This was a murder, this was an assassination. We must call it such, and we must demand justice for Thulani. So I'll try to jump straight now to Jeffrey's question in the interest of time, so we can leave a little bit of time for you, as I said, the most important people in the room, to give us some reactions. When I was in Swaziland, the problems that Thulani was working on, the problems that Velaphi just outlined, were really kind of not being addressed in a coherent way. What Thulani was trying to do and what he did when he became the chairperson of the multi-stakeholder forum was to help bring a unified approach to dealing with these issues. Swazis are a country that have long been politically repressed. There are no political parties, Velaphi has noted. And so people were very much afraid to associate, afraid to speak out, afraid to be seen together taking political action. And Thulani, in his courage, he said that is not the way we're going to move this country forward. We have to be united. So the multi-stakeholder forum is a very important umbrella organization that brought people together. And that very act of unity, which I saw grow tremendously from when I was in the country in 2012 to now, is the threat that Thulani posed. He posed the threat because using peaceful means, advocating that people come together, that was the threat, and that's the threat that had to be snuffed out. But it hasn't been snuffed out. We all know very well that he lit a fire under a lot of people. He was a light for a lot of people, and that struggle continues. So now we come to the question of what can we do? When we had these issues arising, we had labor rights disputes and we had human rights issues, grave issues. The United States in 2015 took the decision to remove Swaziland from a trade preference program called the African Growth and Opportunity Act. That wasn't a quick decision. It took about several years of advocacy to get the government to try to make the kinds of reforms we thought were important, and they weren't going to make those reforms. And then it took about a year of warning them what's coming. And so it's a long process. But we removed the AGOA eligibility for Swaziland in response to their refusal to recognize labor rights, unions, grave human rights abuses, laws that were very draconian. And that stood in place for about 2 years. I was out of the country at the end of 2015, but in 2017, it was returned. And so the lesson that I take from that is that we need to think about tools that are more targeted, that do not do harm to the public, that do not do harm to the general citizenry, and that the cost should be borne by those who are undermining democracy and undermining human rights. So I would say we need to look more carefully at the kinds of tools we use. I don't know that AGOA eligibility or ineligibility is the right tool for the moment. But I would certainly say that we need to think about who are the people that are causing this kind of violence and havoc in the country. Who are these people and entities, because money funds this abuse. Money funds this kind of violence. Money funds the kind of security apparatus and security machinery that's being deployed against average citizens. And so we need to think more smartly about who we target, how we target, so that the citizenry is not paying the price. Because in 2017, it was the labor unions who really joined the discussion about bringing back AGOA because they saw how much harm was being done to the average citizen. So that first of all, start there. Think about smart targeting sanctions, smart approaches. But I think first and foremost, it's about standing with the people of Swaziland, raising our voice. Jeffrey pointed out that I am not a current ambassador, so I feel much more free to speak now. But when you are an ambassador and you represent the United States, which I do not today, I represent myself, I represent people of goodwill, I represent the human rights community that I am a part of. When you're in that position, speaking out is actually very costly. It's costly for diplomats, and it's also because there's a consequence. If you speak out, the government will shun you, the government will not want to see you. I faced that, and I accepted that as the price for speaking out. But also, you run the risk that your own government may not necessarily be in lockstep. But if we don't speak out, we do not give the support, the encouragement, and sometimes the protection that Swazis need. I take a lot of pride in the fact that I went to court a couple of times for Thulani's case, when he was arrested with his colleague, Becky Makuba, because of the articles in the Nation magazine. And that was very important. It kept the conversation in the public eye, and it allowed me to engage with government officials. That's what diplomats do. We stand for values. We are there as major development partners. We cannot be silent on the human rights issues of the day. And so I think speaking up and standing with the people of Swaziland is the first thing that all government officials can do from the United States, the EU, the international community, and of course, all of you here in the United States, and encouraging our government to do that. We should be asking, what is the US response? What is the US doing? That is something that I think is incumbent upon us because of the values that we stand for in a country like eSwatini, and because of what we can do when we do raise our voice. And it's going to be very important for everybody to bear witness and to record the abuses and the documentation of evidence around the cases that Velaphi mentioned. At some point, there will be an accounting, and we need to have that information available. And so all of you who are human rights lawyers in training, you should be thinking smartly about how do we gather that kind of evidence? How do you help people bring those cases? Because there will be a reckoning at that point. But I also want to talk about the region. There was some discussion about SADC and the African Union not being as forceful. We always want the region to step up and do more. And particularly SADC, I have worked in Africa for many, many, many years, and I've seen SADC's response in other cases in Zimbabwe, Lesotho, Mozambique, and it can be a forceful presence if it chooses to. And in Swaziland, it's been a very complicated response because of the relationship with South Africa. It's very much financially dependent upon South Africa. Somebody mentioned the familiar relations between the Lamini family in Swaziland and the Lamini family in South Africa. So there are lots of complications, but mostly it comes down to the courage and the consequences it will take for regional leaders to do more, to be more active. And we shouldn't ignore the fact that things have changed from, say, 2015 to where they are today. In the most recent ANC meeting, you see President Ramaphosa speaking up and saying he stands in solidarity with the people of eSwatini. That is not an insignificant statement for a president of a regional country like South Africa to make. We should hold him to that. We should press him for that. Our government should press him for that. People in the international community should press him for that. But they've also urged this national dialogue that Velaphi talked about. It's so important. It was the thing that Thulani understood would be the force that would allow Swazis to decide their future. So the full and transparent and impartial investigation is critical, but also this national dialogue. And I would say pressing SADC is some of the things that we have to do, pressing the African Union, because the region, I think, has a greater responsibility and a greater role. They're closer to the situation. They're going to be able to culturally engage in Swaziland in a way that the United States cannot. So I think we support the region and we urge the region and we put pressure on the region. And then I would say, we should take note of who are the forceful leaders in that region that we can engage with. The president of Namibia said something very poignant the other day. During the Troika meeting for SADC, he said, if there's no dialogue, there will be war. He's telling us very clearly. SADC understands the challenge. This is not a SADC that is oblivious to it, that is not aware. They understand what it means for the region. If Swaziland does not have a credible dialogue, it means war, it means violence for the region. That's a negative for the whole region. It means the whole region is less stable, less inviting for business. So it has a broader context than just what is happening in Eswatini. SADC has to step up. And I would say the other tools that we should be thinking about are, what is it that this government wants, or what does this government need to stay afloat? Swaziland is a poor country, struggling country. It's not a country that had a lot of foreign direct investment when I was there. I don't think a lot is coming now. The kind of investment that comes there is very opaque, very much elite-based, not about job creation. And so Swaziland is very much a ticking time bomb. All of these young people looking for work who don't have work, the poor housing situation, the poor health situation. And so we should be thinking about what are the things that we can entice this government with, and what are the things that we can use as leverage against them. And I would say we've got to be very careful about the humanitarian threats, because it is a country that still has a huge HIV/AIDS crisis. And we wouldn't want to do things, as I said, that bring harm to the public, but there are lots of other tools in the US toolkit that have to do with trade and development promotion that we should be looking at. Let me stop there. I said a lot. There are a lot of questions I hope that I provoked in you, but I would just leave it with, none of us can afford to be silent. Silence in Swaziland, silence in the region, silence across Africa, silence in our own country only means that people will have the ability to commit these kinds of crimes with impunity. That is not a world that any of us want to live in, where people can be gunned down in front of their family, violently, brutally, and have that chilling effect go across the region and across the continent. There are many human rights workers right now who are very afraid of what it means for them if this kind of case could happen and there is impunity. We cannot let that stand.
Thank you so much. You can keep the microphone down there because I'm actually going to go to Professor Goldman next. But thank you for that response. I think it's safe to say, and I'm sure many would agree, that U.S. foreign policy is much better off when people like you are involved in it. So thank you. I always describe you as an activist, a human rights activist in diplomatic garb. So you held true to that today. So thank you so much for that, and also the feasible realistic things that the U.S. government can do and that we as citizens can push our elected leaders to do as well. Professor Goldman, I want to come to you and give you the space to reflect on Thulani, because I know you had him as a student and you're also the president of the International Commission of Jurists, which, as has been already mentioned, has called for measures to identify and sanction the perpetrators of his murder. So I want to give you space to talk about that as well, but also another, straightforward but perhaps difficult question to answer is how does that happen? How does accountability happen in such a repressive, authoritarian, dictatorial environment that we currently see in Swaziland?
Well, I wish we had to 5. These are big issues. As I said, I'm here in dual capacity, having been Thulani's teacher and also as the president of the International Commission of Jurists. I've been lucky over a long career here to have trained several generations of students. And many have gone on to do human rights work. And a small group of those have really done brilliant work, made contributions. And Thulani was one of them. And but he's the only one who paid the ultimate price for doing so. And so this is personal to me on 2 levels. It's shocking. The circumstances of it are unspeakable. And something needs to be done. But let me say something about the part when he was here in 2010. And he was very fortunate that year because we had visiting with us one of the giants of the law in the world. And that was the former Chief Justice of South Africa and President of the Constitutional Court, the late Arthur Chaskalson, who was also at the time the President of the International Court of Justice. And I know that Thulani admired him as just about anyone in Africa who fought for decency and so forth. The role that Arthur played throughout a career of co-founding the Legal Resource Center, representing Mandela and his wife, in many other figures in key trials and so forth, and such an eloquent voice. And then to become the Chief Justice of that country, presided with the constitutional reform. And we put together a course, because we worked together for several years on a panel that was established by the International Court of Justice to go around the world and to assess what the effects of 9/11 were on the enjoyment of human rights. And as we at the International Commission of Jurists were extremely concerned, as were many others, with various practices of the Bush administration and how it was pursuing the putative war on terror. And so we taught the first real course on human rights and terrorism, which was not a national security law course. It was a comparative looking at responses and how you can construct them. And I know he enjoyed it greatly. And he was also able to take another course that Arthur taught. He was here with us for just 1 semester, and that was a course on comparative constitutional law. And I think he forged a friendship with Arthur and the like. And as I said, I like to think that what he took away from the course and how you deal with authoritarian approaches that help to destroy the rule of law. There are answers and there are ways to deal with it. And so I said it's a very personal thing for me to see what happened to him. The International Commission of Jurists, as Arnold mentioned to you, he was a partner of us. We were very much involved in what his efforts were in Swaziland. And indeed, Arnold was a lawyer for him, fully backed by the International Commission of Jurists and so forth, trying to foster what has been the basic mission of the ICJ for 70 years, the rule of law, democracy, equal protection, and so forth. When he was brutally assassinated, we reacted with a press release. And let me assure you, this is not going to be the end of it. And there are several things, and it's well written, but if I had seen this in advance, there would be some changes. It would be significantly tougher, although I think it is very tough. And certainly, one has to understand that notwithstanding the fact that it is not a democracy, it nonetheless, as many undemocratic countries have done, have ratified the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. And it's just a general principle under these instruments, whether or not you've accepted the individual complaint procedure, which they have not in the case of the ICCPR, that whenever an event like this occurs, the government has an obligation to undertake a prompt, independent, impartial investigation that is destined to identify the perpetrators. And perpetrators mean not only the people or the person who pulled the trigger, but the intellectual author. And if that means the king, that means the king. And that these people have to be brought to trial and sanctioned appropriately, and that the family, which can never be compensated for the loss of a husband and of a father, be given appropriate reparation. The ICJ at the same time called upon the Southern African Development Community to set up an oversight mechanism of the kind that Arnold referred to that had been used previously to ensure an independent and impartial investigation, because it's not going to take place. It simply is not going to take place. So where do we go from this? I was pleased to see that the special rapporteur on human rights defenders of the Human Rights Council of the United Nations and so forth has been made aware of this, and this is obviously something squarely within her remit. On issues like this, civil society needs to mobilize. And civil society needs to put pressure on governments. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if civil society, which drives the human rights field everywhere, if they don't keep this alive and press for governments to do something, then there will never be accountability for this. Over my career with many human rights organizations, and one of my commissioners and fellow partners in crime, Juan Mendez, who is here today, and our work at America's Watch over the years and so forth, you learn a few things, how you deal with governments and how governments can be helpful. I can tell you that for human rights defenders, those who remain, those who are at risk, it's important that they're received in embassies publicly. And it would be good if they're received in the embassy of South Africa, in other countries with influence, that lists are kept and the governments are told, we do not expect a similar fate to happen. These seem like little things, but I'm telling you, I've seen this save lives countless times. Amnesty, Human Rights Watch also has taken this up, but it is no substitute, in my view, for concerted action by civil society institutions. Every point of pressure of Swaziland should be exploited at the international, regional, and sub-regional thing. You should be pushed for agenda items on things. And I can tell you, so long as I am president of the International Commission of Jurists, and I've just been reelected to a final 2-year term. I will see to it that we will play our role, that we will push for these things. But again, when you say that you have dictatorships, when you have others, in the 50 years that I have been involved in human rights, I have seen things that would not have thought to be possible. That a Pinochet who could go and visit the UK and have tea with Baroness Thatcher ended up becoming the English patient. Sitting in the countryside, perhaps reading Shakespeare, but worried about whether he was going to be extradited to Spain or eventually went back to Chile, and he was disgraced, and it completely changed the dynamic in Chile that led to the constitutional reforms and other things. Many people believe that the members of the Argentine military or the Uruguayan military, who were all powerful, would never be brought before the dock. It's happened. Sometimes it's delayed, but dictatorships rest on a thin, thin reed, and many things can happen. And popular mobilization of the kind where the individuals are, in effect, they realize they are supported by regional and international civil society groups, frequently will help to be the catalyst. But at the end of the day, governments have a role to play. Something like this should not go unpunished and so forth. So we all have to do our share. I'm angry as hell. And I can guarantee you that my colleagues and I at the International Commission of Jurists, we will play a role in this, and hopefully we'll see that you can come back and that it'll be better. Thanks.
There's a picture with the Arthur.
That's a great picture. That's a great picture.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that submission and for your insights. You made a really important point about how, dictatorships across the world, not just the monarchy in Swaziland, rest on a thin reed, but what they also do is they thrive in darkness, right? Yep. They become more emboldened and they become stronger in the shadows. And it's our job collectively in our own unique individual and collective ways that hopefully have a multiplier effect to expose that. And so I'm really glad you made that point. And I think we have about 15 minutes for question and answers, 10 minutes. We've received some through Zoom, and I know we have some in the room. So perhaps you can go around the room and folks raise their hands if you have a question. But just one that I thought was really interesting that we got through, and this is a nice sort of follow-up to what you were just talking about, Professor Goldman, and also Ambassador James and Velaphi talking about the need for regional leadership, which has been lacking. And one of the questions was, what would be the feasibility and impact of an independent investigation led by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights? As we know, as was just mentioned, Swaziland has signed and ratified the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. So what would be the impact of that regionally led independent investigation supported by the UN special mechanisms as enshrined in the African Union Roadmap on Traditional Justice Policy? So perhaps Velaphi, what the impact that would be on the local level, and perhaps Ambassador and Professor on the regional and international dynamics there and the impact of that.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. We believe that the killings that are taking place in Swaziland, not just that of Comrade Thulani, all the killings that have taken place in Swaziland, there should be accountability for them. And of course, we support and believe in African institutions. And African institutions, in this case, should come to the party in terms of conducting an independent investigation. I think that we must give those institutions the benefit of the doubt as Africans, because it's important to build those institutions, but also to make sure that we create precedents for the kind of consequence management that needs to be in place for these atrocities. So I completely agree that there should be an investigation. And in fact, all the killings that have taken place in Swaziland need to be investigated objectively by independent investigators, and those people that are behind it, those killings should be taken to task and be accountable for them. Thank you.
I'll just add very briefly that if I didn't make it clear in my first statement, this is first and foremost the struggle of the people of Swaziland. They are the ones who are leading this. They're the ones who are putting their lives on the line. And then you go out from them to the people in the region because it has a regional impact, and then of course to the continent. So I would fully support what Velaphi is laying out, that it should be African institutions leading the charge and being up front, and all of us in the international community can support those efforts. That is really the best way to see a sustainable, lasting mechanism for accountability. Because as you say, it's not just the brutal murder of Thulani, but it's many, 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 many before him. And sadly, there'll be others to come. And so we do need African institutions to step up, and we need to be supportive of those institutions. It doesn't mean that we take this notion of African solutions to African problems, because human rights are global, they're international, but we have to allow the Swazi leadership to really take this message to the people in the way that it's that they will most hear it and most respond to it, but then we can support. So I have been advocating that we keep the pressure on countries like South Africa, the SADC region generally, because they, as part of the international community, but specifically the regional community, have the frontline responsibility. We must keep that pressure up. And if the African People's Commission could be a helpful source, which of course Swazi activists have gone to over the years, that would be great. But my quite honest fear is that the African Union will not respond before or ahead of SADC. SADC has to really be encouraged and forced to be the lead, the tip of the spear, if you will, and the African Union will join that. The African Union did put out a statement. It was a decent statement, but it did not have the force and the weight that SADC's own activities will. So that's where I think the focus should be, on SADC and keeping the shaming and the blaming of them if they do not step up, because it has a global and a continental impact. It's not just a Swazi problem.
Absolutely.
Could I just add,
Absolutely.
I always found that when you deal with thuggish governments, you've got to use every lever. And it's not just regionally, it's internationally. They should know no peace. They should have to respond at the UN level. They should have to respond to the special rapporteurs ask for visits and so forth. And this is, as I said, I was very enthused to see that, or reassured that Ms. Lawler and so forth, having the mandate for human rights defenders. It would be important. She talks with the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Because like you said, it's not just the issue. He's become a symbol of an ongoing struggle. He's the most visible victim, but there are others who are going to pick up the mantle. When I was a member of the Inter-American Human Rights Commission and so forth, I was in charge of Colombia for 8 years. And I made sure by the time we left, we had put on 100 provisional orders for human rights defenders in communities. And I can tell you, some got killed, but we saved a hell of a lot of lives. And there are mechanisms within the ICE and CPR, within the African Commission. Everything should be explored to create additional prices for this government. And it can have the effect, the immediate one, short term, don't kill more people. There's a broader issue in terms of the whole process. But I would think that the regional, if they see pressure is coming internationally from the UN, from key governments and so forth, they will be shamed into acting. And so it has to be looked at short-term things where you have levers, where they have to respond, make them respond to these things. And I think that, as I said, it's ongoing. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the really important point too is, holding up a mirror to that repression. There's even basic things that we can do. You know, for instance, I think of, you know, the street name in front of the Saudi embassy being changed to Jamal Khashoggi Way. Why not a local DC resident petitioning their local councilman or councilwoman to change the name in front of the Swazi embassy, so they're always reminded of, we know what you did and we're going to hold you accountable. Simple things like that. I think we have 2 or 3 minutes, so maybe just do like a quick bucket of questions, and we can sorry, can we do the questions? Yeah, so maybe two or three questions, really brief questions and not statements, and just your name, affiliation, and we can maybe take 2 or 3 and then we can answer them and get to the Swazi justice video, which I think you'll all really enjoy. So I think someone had a hand raised, so yeah. Yeah, please go.
Thank you very much, everybody attending. The question is, what can activists do, Swazi as well, the diaspora do to support the call for freedom once they're outside of their own country? Swazi in South Africa, of course, but also in the UK and the US. There's a lot of people here that are working, that have come to study, and they would like to contribute. My name is Martina Verino. I come from the North.
Thank you so much.
I would like to first acknowledge and recognize the honorable excellency of Assassinated James for all the work that you did. You were very around. I saw your work. And you responded to some of my emails personally, and I really think the work that you did was strong. You made a huge impact. It was a voice. The ambassador who come out and had a powerful and also recognize Mr. Goldman, Velaphi, my Swazi brother, and Jeff Smith. Last saw Jeff Smith here on this campus when Thulani was in prison. And I just want to say, I know Thulani's whole family, but I was very close to his father. Father, we was said, all the children of Thulani's family were taught by my mom in the primary school. That we lived in the same Punya area. So I know the family very good. My father was a chief. Thulani actually came from the chieftains. Father, we was Maseko. He used to travel here with the king. And I remember one time they were here, and I went to see them. And he said, "Boss," because I also come from Wales. So he said, "Boss." School boy, my father's nickname, he was a teacher. He was a teacher, that's the nickname they gave him in school. And the king looked, he said, "You know each other?" That's how, the Maseko family meant so much to us in the village. They were very important family in the Punya village. And so I just want to say, what has happened in short of all of us? I was just like, Thulani and I disagree politically because this for dialogue. I am not for dialogue. I don't think 1.2 million people should go and sit down with one thing. He must be forced to advocate. Here's my answer. I don't care. I don't like the institution of the monarchy because by the extent of that, you say somebody is superior by the extent of that. You don't know what his traits are. You don't know his character. He has no accomplishments when you put him in the political power, say, "I can't make decisions for all of us." It doesn't make sense. I think it's fundamentally wrong to say all of us 1.2 million Swazi must go and sit down with this one man. I'm against dialogue. I'm saying that you Americans, all of you in the room, just like me, I'm an American now. My congressman is Jerry Conlon. My senator is Mark Williams in Kenya. And I'm sure all of you know who you're representing by Congress. I worked for one of the offices at Transafrica. You three Nelson Mandela for instance. And we ended apartheid in South Africa. How? Through the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act that was passed by Congress in 1986. We need to do a similar thing. King Mzwakhe comes to the United States all the time. He loves coming in. All his children go to school here in America. Targeted sanctions, we can target him personally, his family, his cronies, and all the people around him. So the dialogue thing, I'm sorry. Velaphi, my brother, I know you're for dialogue. I am against this dialogue. I don't think we should talk to this criminal. Things like the matter on a regular routine basis. If you use the literal name, kill people and use their blood and human flesh. Because the things that gives them power, strength, and wealth. I don't know how that works. So I just want to say, people of America, all of us here in this room mostly are legal scholars. I know you know your representatives, Congress, and Senate. We apply to presidents.
We're running out of time. So thank you. Maybe I think there's another comment there. Maybe?
Sure, 30 seconds.
If you're running out of time.
No, absolutely. Please go ahead.
Well, my name is Peter Biara Jack. I come from South Sudan. I'm currently a fellow at Harvard, and I'm the coordinator of the World Liberty Congress for Africa. I never met Thulani in person, but I've communicated with him on Zoom several times. My question is for those of you who are advocating for a regional approach or a region to take approach. The week that Thulani was killed, there were other assassinations that happened across the continent, in Cameroon, in Rwanda, and this is happening all over. Many of us who believe in democracy on the continent have no faith whatsoever in African Union or any of these regional organizations. Yes. So how are they going to take a lead to investigate one of their own? Second, Swazi was invited by President Biden to attend the recently concluded US-Africa Leaders Summit. And this was after he has killed many of the activists. I know Thulani was in the case with others, the terrorism case, where all of them have been killed now except one person, Maxwell Velaphi, who has recently fled to exile in South Africa. What is US doing? Like the AGOA thing is, it doesn't make sense to me. Here is the person, and as you correctly put it, his family is here, he's coming here all the time. Why is he not sanctioned? What is the purpose of the so-called Global Magnitsky Act, if not to punish individuals like King Swazi? Finally, dialogue, all of these things. The reality is this man does not want dialogue. And the SADC has shown time again that they are not going to push him. What option are you leaving if not violence? I come from South Sudan, where many years we asked for dialogue with the North Sudan, it didn't work. We had to go to war for 2 decades until the agreement gave us the right to go to the referendum to create our own country. Must people of Swaziland go to war, and must millions of people die before we recognize what they're fighting for?
Thank you, Peter. So I think we have 3 questions. I think we'll just do a round robin, maybe starting with Ambassador James, Professor Goldman, and concluding with Velaphi, if that's okay. We have a question about what activists can do globally to help and to stand in solidarity with Swazi HRDs. The question on dialogue, why is that necessary? And then Peter, your issue about the January 20th to January 22nd, we had 3 consecutive days of very high profile HRDs being killed. John Williams and in Rwanda, Martina Zogo in Cameroon, and of course Thulani Maseko and eSwatini. So how can we work together to stop this? And the issue of dictators at the White House is a project of mine that I speak about quite frequently. So perhaps starting with Ambassador James and coming this way.
Okay. For the person who's no longer in the U.S. government, I'm going to speak about the U.S. government, but I'm not speaking for the government. First, I want to say to Peter Biara, I have not met you in person, but I know your case very well because I covered Southern Sudan, I covered South Sudan, and your name actually was mentioned many times in many of my entreaties in my conversations with your government, because you also are a person of great courage, of great commitment. You have made great sacrifices for your country, and I want to acknowledge who you are to this room. You are the kind of person that Thulani also was, and we want to be sure that you are safe and protected. And I'm so glad to see you here, because when I went to your country, you were in prison at that time, and I had conversations with your government about freeing you. And I don't know how much we really had an impact then, but over time, that pressure did build. So really good to see you here. We just stop with that. Nothing else is very important for fact. And I'm just gonna touch very quickly on your point and then respond to the young woman who asked about the region and what people can be doing. We cannot give a pass to SADC because they have been weak, because they have not been leading, because they have not always stepped up. They have responsibility. These are the men, and we're talking about the men who were elected by their people in their countries to bring peace, development, stability to that region, and they are falling short. So we have to keep the pressure. And we also have to note when there have been changes. What we see happening in the last, I'd say maybe the last 3 years, since 21, when Botswana became very involved in trying to pressure the king, when South Africa under Ramaphosa began to escalate a bit of its pressure, and even tried to negotiate a deal and tried to use economic leverage to try to bring them around. And then, of course, the most recent Troika meeting under the president of Namibia. We have to monitor the changes in the progress that's happening. They haven't been the same as the last 5 years when nothing much was happening. Something is happening. The region is sensing that they cannot have a development agenda with this really backward governance agenda in a neighboring state. It impacts the whole region. So I do think there is pressure to be put to bear there, but we should not accept that SADC doesn't have a responsibility and write them off as not being capable. They are capable. They know what's going on. The fact that the Namibia president said no dialogue leads to war tells us a lot. What happened quietly in that room was very important. We're never going to know the extent and the way that they have engaged with the Swazi government, but trust me, when a president says that publicly, it belies a lot that's said behind the scenes. So I do think something is happening there, and we have to keep that pressure. Do not let up. To the young woman here, I would simply say, what really disturbed the Swazi government in the last few days is seeing demonstrations in Kenya, seeing people in Zambia speaking up, seeing civil society in the region coming together. And therein is the magic, and that's the key that Thulani understood so well. It is that united movement of civil society groups. And I'm also very pleased to see Swazis finally getting out and making their case more forcefully in the region. It is surprising how few people really understand the depth of the problem. I've had Zambian government say to me, but the Swazis love their king and they love the situation. They don't really have a problem. So there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of educating to be done. And so I'd say to civil society groups, get out, link arms, give lessons learned. Certainly the people in Zambia understand what it means to struggle, and they've had a very successful election and a whole new change of government there, a new dynamic. So there is reason for the civil society groups in the region to come together to put that collective pressure on SADC and the African Union and to the broader international community. And Professor, I would underscore what you said. The UN has a role to play too, but we have to be realistic and practical. It is the people who are closest to this brutality who are going to have the greatest stake and who are going to take the greatest risk. We must empower them, support them, stand with them, and bear witness constantly. They will lead this, and we can all join them. We cannot lead it for them.
Well, yes. Let me just be very brief on one thing. I really did not realize that the king traveled so often, that the kids and so forth are here in this country. Drawing on analogies to other situations, that I don't know what kind of information that President Biden is. He doesn't give the invitations, and he deals with the people who show up. This is a failure somewhere. And one of the things that, and I think the ambassador would understand this also, bipartisan group of members in Congress who write to the Secretary of State and say, we are very concerned about the fact and the brutal murder, and we want to bring your attention and so forth. You mentioned the Majinsky Act. Do other things like that. Guess what? It puts them on the defensive, and something can grow. And enlist Human Rights Watch. Get others. In other words, the ones in this country who have influence in the Congress and so forth. And you can get key members of Congress. And I think that this is something you can get on both sides of the aisle, so that I would explore it. And it's going to put, quite frankly, the administration on the defensive as why they are permitted. You're not dealing with you're not dealing with, Biden having to go to Saudi Arabia, notwithstanding things, because for the economy, we need oil. They don't have oil. There's nothing much strategic or whatever. And so I think there's a real possibility of utilizing the Congress here to put pressure.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll try to be brief and in response. Let me first say that in terms of your question about what can be done to help Swazis, especially by Swazis in the diaspora, I think the one thing that's clear is that geopolitically, the interests of the Swazi government are shifting towards a look east policy. We are seeing deepening relations with countries like India, countries like Russia, countries like Bangladesh, and all these Oriental states. And this is a clear indication that the authorities want to move away from the ideals of democracy. We want you who want to help us to support the campaign for democracy in Swaziland, to also support it in practical ways. Right now, we have a growing body of exilees, people who are leaving the country because they are afraid for their lives. Those people need to be supported in terms of shelter, in terms of protection, in terms of, so I liked the idea, for example, that Professor made about beginning to build a list of people that need to be protected. And this is something we can immediately start to work on, because we know that there is also a list for people to be killed by the state. So then we have to have our own list of people to be protected, so that should they be killed, we know who is to be held accountable. So that's one thing. There are many widows right now who are in the situation like Comrade Thulani's wife, Comrade Daniel, who have children that need to be raised. That's the kind of support that we think is important, to be mobilized so that those families and those children can be supported to continue going to school, to continue living lives, and to grow up into responsible adults. So those are practical things that can immediately be done. Like someone was saying, we also need you to talk to your governments, to your members of Congress, to amplify the voices of those 1.2 million Swazis that require assistance at this point in history. I want to end with addressing the question of dialogue. I'm not someone who believes in grandstanding. One of the first demands of the multi-stakeholder forum is an inclusive, externally mediated national political dialogue. And I'm unashamed to associate myself with this demand, because we understand that at the end of the day, political change and social change and transformation will ultimately require Swazis to talk, to have a dialogue, and the dialogue is not about the king. Let us not be, please, let us not be wedded to this idea that we are talking about just an individual. We are talking about citizens and institutions that need to be reformed. There has to be a process of sitting down and deciding what that will look like. There has to be a process of crafting a new national constitution. All that will come together through a national dialogue, right? The questions of accountability for the king and the violations that he has done, we all know what those are, and we agree with them. We agree that he must be held accountable to that standard. We agree, for example, that if necessary, he must go to The Hague and be tried there, because all the killings that have happened in Swaziland can be traced back to one person, who is him, right? But we can't pull the entire country down because of one man. We're talking about institutions here, and changing political institutions will require not rhetorics. It will require us to be pragmatic. So we, as the multi-stakeholder forum, are very clear that we want a national political dialogue that is inclusive, that is based on parameters that are globally accepted, and that will result in clear political objectives and clear political change in the body politics of Swaziland. This is what we want. Other people like yourself, Monty, can have other perspectives on this, but we are very clear that ultimately that's the kind of dialogue we're demanding. I want to end by saying, we don't want any further bloodbath in Swaziland. We don't want our people killed. 1.2 million people is a very small population to have a war. Swazi people are related. Swazi people know each other. It's a tight-knit society. We cannot have approaches that will decimate the entire fabric of and foundations of our society. We must sit down and redesign craft a new pathway forward that recognizes the kind of people that we are, but that is also attuned to the values that we want for a new democratic state, like all other democracies.
What happened is South Africa. Let's South Africans do not ask for dialogue. We apply pressure on South Africa. And the Congress applied the pressure. You can't just sit and don't talk and sit with Maseko and he's going to say, okay, I share power with you. It's not going to happen, Velaphi. You and your political party, the very fact that you associate with ANC in South Africa, those criminals.
So let's stop the conversation.
Sure.
This is a longer conversation about the future of
absolutely.
Swaziland.
Yes.
I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank
you
for moderating. And I want us to see the video that was produced.
Yeah.
If it's possible. And I want it's very good.
So to tee it up really quickly, should we, Hadar? So this was a video that I think we actually thought of it in an ABA office almost a decade ago. So at the time, Thulani and Becky Mukubu were in prison. They had been in prison for several months. We wanted to create an international advocacy campaign to agitate for their release. On a whim, we were like, we need a really big person on a complete whim. And this is just to show Thulani's, stature and how beloved he was across the region. I cold emailed Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and he responded immediately saying, yes, I want to take part in this. And then we were able to get all these amazing people who you'll see on the video talking in Thulani's own words. So these are his own words from a speech he delivered.
The speech he was not allowed to deliver.
That's right.
This was the decision he was going to make for himself in court, and he was denied the ability to do that. So we made this video with many people who you will recognize, some of whom work in this building or used to. And these are 3 minutes words.
3 minutes long. And before that, I want to thank Derek.
Yes.
And Denise, because without them having the technology, we wouldn't be able to have any of it. And Derek, they're really short staff in AV, so he's gone beyond the call of duty to be with us and to help us. As this room is not the best equipped room for all the work we're doing. So Derek, thank you so much. This is called Swazi Justice.
Of my defense is that I'm not in contempt of court,
but that the people of Swaziland are treated with contempt
and disgust in this regard. The people of Swaziland have a right to determine and shape their destiny. If truth be told,
this trial is about the prosecution and persecution of the aspirations of the people of this land
to determine their own destiny democratically and freely.
When freedom is taken away, it becomes the onerous and supreme duty
of man to reclaim it from the oppressor.
For giving up freedom is tantamount to giving away man's right to dignity.
One can have no dignity without his or her freedom.
Without our freedom, we are a people without a soul.
I am willing to pay the severest penalty, even if it means spending more days or even more years in jail.
It is well with my soul.
I accept the penalty with a clean and clear conscience that I did no wrong. Human rights
are inherent,
inalienable,
indivisible,
and inviolable.
This is clearly
not the case.
In Swaziland.
It is our respectful contention
that the issue here is not
and has never been contempt of court.
The issue is the
abuse of the courts
to silence
dissenting voices
in order to suppress
aspirations for democratic change.
The people are yearning for freedom,
democracy,
and justice.
Suppressing ideas
never succeeds in making them go away.
even if brutal force,
arrests, and other forms of
suppression
are used to silence dissent.
History shows
that penalties do not deter men and women
when their conscience is aroused.
the path to freedom
goes through prison.
The triumph of justice over evil
Is inevitable.
Nothing this court can do
Will shake me from
My commitment
to simple truth.
simple
Justice.
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 Justice.